Welcome back to the workshop, where we are super detailing a post-war Lionel engine. Yeah, this is an NW2, probably built earlier than I previously thought. Probably from 1949 to 1950. It's a bell ringer edition. Hello, my name is Doug, and we are back at the bench. This is episode number 2, where we are going to take this engine all the way to color. We added rivets last episode using brads. Very small brads will look like rivets when you use them properly. Now, you got to cut the insides off, which can be hazardous, so shield your eyes. If you need something a little smaller than a household brad, you can always use HO scaled tie spikes. These track spikes are so small you can even use them for control panel details. Now we'll work on the hidden door. Did you realize there was a door here for the engineer that faced forward? Yep, it actually was there. Never shown on any of the Lionel engines because, well, it's outside of the tooling condition. They would have to add a slide to the tool to put that in, so it gets conveniently left out for costing issues. Got to put a handle on this door, of course, and we are going to use that piano wire that's really, really stiff. And we make a tiny part to fit into this hole. This handle looks very much like the real thing, and once we get it into the right position, we're going to set it in place with some CA glue. Hey, make sure you stay with me till the end of the video because I'll show you how to make, believe it or not, how to make windshield wipers out of soda can metal. It'll be totally cool and very worthwhile. Right now, this is a fun one. I haven't seen anybody do this, so I'm going to do it. I'm going to put in some shades that are not in the retracted mode. Lionel always made these engineer convenient shades, always rolled up because it's much easier to do that. Didn't take an extra part. I'm going to use aluminum and make these look like the real thing with some supports on them as well. I was able to find several visual references. I'm going to follow this particular one. This will be painted white after we put it in. This is about 2mm thick aluminum for our UK friends. And now as we cut, my poor dogs Byron and Bear, I always worry about them. I have to put some goggles on these guys because they sit at my feet as we cut this stuff. And it goes flying everywhere. And I'm using some very low-tech tools too. These are pizza shears. On this gauge of aluminum, you really don't need anything heavy duty. Now here I flatten out the piece after cutting, just using a jewelry block. I always used to be kind of concerned about using aluminum for these type of purposes. I think the recent paints are so much better. They really hold to this metal, especially if you scuff it up just a little bit. I'm using very stiff piano wire as the supports. You have to make sure you bend them both at the same time for the right and left sides so they're the same size. And as long as you measure it correctly and do a little bending ahead of time, it'll fit in there just perfectly. In some of our previous scratch build, we've talked about greeblies, and we're going to do greeblies on this particular model. Greeblies are just a catch-all phrase for tiny little parts that might have definitions, may not have any definitions at all. When they're working on spacecraft at ILM, sometimes they're just putting little notches and pokes and bobs in places that make it look like it's a real ship. We're not doing any trickery here, though. We're only putting some details in where they actually belong. Now, whether I understand exactly what they are or not, that's another thing. As promised, it's time to make windshield wipers from throwaway material. Sure, we're going to use the piano wire, but have you used soda can aluminum? This stuff is great because it is so thin and easy to work with, and it makes really nice details if you need a thin material that's strong. All I'm doing here is making little tiny strips of this aluminum material. Then taking an L shape from the piano wire, I just simply glue on this little stretch of aluminum. Fingers are away, a little jet of Instaset. Just take a look at the window where this is headed. We'll make a quick trim. And look, we've got windshield wipers. If you prefer to make these just a little bit thinner, go right ahead. Cut them with the scissors. Make that aluminum as thin as you want. And now it's time to drill holes and put them in. Once you spray these things with Tamiya primer, you'll be amazed. They just kind of set back and become a part of the model. Now what I'm going to end up doing is painting this partially silver, partially black, and it really makes a super detail. One sure way to really improve this model over what it was when it was first manufactured is to add railings to it. And believe me, on the EMD locomotives, there were quite a few railings. They were kind of different though, depending on which railroad they were made for. However, we're doing these from the Union Pacific Railroad, so I'm going to make a little abbreviation. Normally this railing would go down into the chassis, but since this body needs to come off for service, I'm making them a little bit shorter. Now, those of you with eagle eyes, did you notice that I did a little switcheroo on you? I actually used piano wire for the final railings because it's just a little bit stiffer than the brass. Now, let's take a look at the front vent railing. Now, I'm not really sure what this does. I see things that are wrapped around it like chains. I purchased a very small scale chain that I'll be putting around it. If you look really close at the items that have been welded on, there's actually a little tang that has been welded. So what I'm going to do here is use a greebly to indicate those small weldments. I've had a few of these Lionel NW2 locomotives, and I really don't care for the bell. Here's an original. I'm going to use a third-party bell in just a few minutes. Since I've added so many railings and other details, we need to check the fit on the chassis, and I think we are just fine. Here is where the super detailing begins to pay off. We're going to paint this thing, yeah. The yellow and red colors we're going to mix together to make Union Pacific orange. Neutral gray goes up on top. We're going to cover it with flat clear and maybe a little bit of semi-gloss after we put on the decals. I'm going to show you a little bit of my preparation, which might differ from yours a little bit. I use pipettes to be able to measure pretty accurately as I mix paints. Just a few drops of red into the yellow are all that you really need, and I'm using an existing sprayed model to match. Once I get it done, I call it Union Pacific Red, and we are ready to start airbrushing. Secrets to a great paint job is good preparation. I found this tape that's very inexpensive and works really well. It's called frog tape. I know you can find it at Walmart stores and probably a lot of other places as well. It's inexpensive and look how beautifully it masks. Very nice. I love it when you find something that is at a great price that works so beautifully. We're done with the airbrush for the most part. Now it's time to go in, move in close with some brush colors. To make it easier to reach up to a line, I take a line of water and put it up against the edge before I start in with paint. Now it looks a little messy at the beginning, but you'll notice the paint flows right to that straight line. As I do the edges, I'm going to add one more coat, and as that final coat begins to dry, you'll see that it flattens out very nicely. I was looking at my documentation of Lionel NW2 early makes. I thought in the beginning that this was a 1954 model, but it turns out the bell ringing function only happened during 1949 and 1950, which probably means that this one is from 1940. 1949, which I think is kind of cool because in 1949, they were still making the NW2 as a new locomotive. Most of these went to Union Pacific. I believe they had 1,100 of them. The Lionel bell ringing models, the 622 and the 6220, are rather valuable because of the ingenious bell ringing mechanism. People got really frustrated listening to the bell, and a lot of them were disconnected and parts are missing on these. So to get one that is complete is really quite a feat. I really don't care for the Lionel bell that's been on the NW2, so I chose this third-party bell. Very inexpensive, just a few dollars on eBay, and I think it's going to work really well. Of course, there's a bit of finishing that has to go with it. It's not going to fit together as cast, so you got to do a little work on it with files and sandpaper before you put it all together, but it really forms a very nice unit when finally assembled. The little pivots can actually form a bell that goes back and forth as if it were ringing. So theoretically, you could put a little servo on it and make it do that. And then this locomotive would resemble maybe a legacy locomotive from Lionel that sells for around $2,000. I guess little things can impress me a lot, and this bell really does. When you put it together, look, it really makes a cool assembly. I've taken off some of the casting lines with 500 grit sandpaper and then used 4/0 steel wool to give it a really nice shine. Now, to make sure that that shine stays there, I'm going to cover it with clear coat. Now just a little bit of cyanoacrylate. Make sure it's in the proper position and we are golden. As I do this particular video, Tester's paint is no longer in production. I have several of these little bottles that are years old. I'm using the silver paint to really pop up these windshield wipers, and I'll use a little black then on the rubber portions. Well, let's stand back from 10 paces and see how we've done. It's starting to really look like a Union Pacific locomotive. The main paint into place. We have a few of the small details painted. Next, decals. Yeah, this was certified fun. We finish next episode. Bear and Byron will be here. You too, I hope.